becomes very awkward. It's time to grab the chair. Don't be shy, you should jump at the front. We have enough space. There will be more time for refreshments and food after the presentation. So before I introduce you to today's speaker, Norbert, to talk about the future of FinTech, let me tell you a few things about this event and people behind this event hosting you today. So basically, Eat, Learn, and Create Reciprocal Opportunities is the name of this event, as you probably saw. And the people behind this concept is actually ELCRO, so it's our company. We're a marketing company. So we help with 360 marketing communication services. Our vision is really to help encourage ethical performance. And we do that by, of course, creating reciprocal opportunities. That is the reason why we wanted you, and we thank you for being here with us today. These are some of the destinations we've picked, because business, just like life, is not a destination, it's really a journey. And those are the destinations we've picked on our CRO journey together at ELCRO. So as I mentioned, creative marketing branding agency. We like to use creativity and combine it with technology to create the future and add value to brands and businesses in the most ethical way, as I mentioned earlier. Those are kind of services we offer, so anything from video to digital, social media marketing, but also website design, development, e-commerce. Visual art, we do have a mangaka in-house. If some of you have checked our website, you probably noticed some drawings. So he's responsible for that, and branding. So we like to help shape brands, create brands, which add value to people's life. Those are the drawings I was just talking about earlier. So please meet the team. Today you have a few of our team members who are present. You probably have noticed Kaysan and Adele at the entrance. Adele is still in the entrance. Kaysan is somewhere over there. You have Pon also. Pon is going to do video today and photography. If you want your photographs taken, come to him and ask for it. Chad is in the US today. He's our brand strategist. Julio is not here. He's our mangaka I mentioned. Yuya, our project manager. And Marco is also helping operating the second camera today. Thanks, Marco. He's our engineering manager and e-commerce specialist. A little bit about us. If there is one thing you need to remember about us, it's that we like to be remembered as ACE marketers. ACE stands for authentic, creative, and experiential marketing. So you pick the concept. If you're a fan of manga, you probably know this gentleman. If you play cards like poker, or if you play sports, please remember us by this. Before we start today's event, I would like to introduce you our next speaker, Fabien. Fabien is going to talk about the future of HR. It's going to be on September 14th in Marinoci. So Fabien, if you want to just please come and tell us a little something about you. Thank you, Fabien.
Hi everyone, my name is Fabien. I launched a startup about 2 years ago now, which is called Hire Planner. It's a cloud recruiting management system, and we help companies to streamline and simplify their hiring process. What I'll be talking about in September is sharing some of my own experience when I was working and running recruiting at Apple and Tesla, and also sharing some of the comparison between the overseas market of recruiting and the techniques in Japan, how behind Japan can be for some things, especially in HR technology, and how crucial it is to invest in technology if you want to balance well AI with EI, so the term emotional intelligence, which is more and more important and not commonly used in Japan. So we'll be talking about a lot of exciting ways to attract talent in Japan. And yeah, I look forward to see you all on September 14th, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for that. That's going to be September 14th, and that's indeed becoming a challenge in Japan to recruit people. As we know, the demographics, population is aging and declining, so how to compensate that and attract the right talents for your company. It's going to be September 14th. A little word also about Place to Be. So this is Place to Be. Thank you very much for having us today, and I would like to welcome Pierre and Samir, both of you together if you want, to say a little something about Place to Be. And I think you will talk much better about it than me. But
yeah. Thank you very much for coming here today. It's a pleasure to welcome you, and thank you for the opportunity to, I would say, show and host an event, such event today about the FinTech at Place to Be. Basically, Place to Be is, I would say, an initiative, community and a workspace for, I would say, tech startup who would like to kickstart their business in Japan. We are actually from the Bouygues Group, which is like a large French conglomerate, and we are leading all of the innovation in new businesses. We had a lot of inquiries from a lot of startups and I would say innovation ecosystem about, like, you know, how to get plug connected here. So we just decided to open this small, I would say, adventurous co-working and community space to be able to be the hub in Tokyo for such ventures.
yeah, that's fine.
You explained it perfectly. So I'm the boss. That's it. I let the other people work.
Yeah. So if you have any questions, if you know any people who are struggling with their businesses and try to get connected, it's one of the space where you can actually meet those type of people. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, a little word also about Ad Forum. I don't know if some of you are, I know some of you are part of advertising or global agencies. Ad Forum is a place to connect with global agencies from around the world, and we are the local representative for Japan since very recently. So yeah, just wanted to say a few words. If you know people who work at advertising or PR or marketing companies, invite them to take a look at Ad Forum. We can also support to help them gain visibility through this channel. And without further ado, I would like to introduce Norbert, our speaker. Please, Norbert. And of course, join me in giving him a round of applause for encouragement. So by the time you get here, I think you all know Robert, so I think an introduction is not needed. So Robert, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Adrian, and thanks to Place to Be for hosting us here today. I'd like to introduce myself regardless just a little bit. I'm a 20-year veteran of capital markets. I have spent most of my time with Goldman Sachs, and the two noticeable events during my career, I would say, was one, I was lucky enough during the time frame 2005 to 2007 to basically build new broker-dealer businesses from the ground up in China and India. We built a bank in Korea, and then following that, as my colleagues started in Brazil and Russia, we continued scaling those businesses. And obviously, you can only enter a new market for the first time once, so it's very exciting to be part of a team of like 4 or 5 people that sits in a hotel suite somewhere and tries to figure out how the hell you're going to connect to exchange and start a trading business. The second was probably spent 60 hours non-stop from Monday morning through Wednesday night after Lehman Brothers went bankrupt on our trading desk, and we've been very paranoid in running P&L religiously every single day. And after Lehman went bankrupt, the company couldn't do the P&L for 2 days, which was a nightmare event because obviously in this scenario you had no clue where you stood financially. And on Wednesday night, and finally we forced the traders to close the books so that we had some view again. So that's like 2 highlights out of it. 20-year career. And obviously with that, I've worked for some very reputable companies. For those of you who are a little older, who've seen these events, one of them is Goldman Sachs and the other is Barclays, all very, very reputable companies. And so since we're probably going to touch upon crypto at some point in the presentation here, just a disclaimer, I'm not licensed to give investment advice. I will not give you investment advice. And my personal investment track record is such that whatever I'm saying, you're probably better off doing exactly the opposite. So, without further ado, the question is, like, where are we? We're in like lots of hype. Are we hitting the reality phase already or not? And the interesting thing about this is if you look at Google, you can track kind of how many people actually search for specific terms, and you see kind of the fintech trend here. Actually, this was a snapshot I've taken in May. I've done it again yesterday, and I didn't want to update it because it falls a little off over the last 2 months. So I think that goes probably hand in hand with the crypto market, so there's some correlation. But now think about which term might be more hype than fintech. That's pretty obvious. The blue line here is the same line that you've seen on the fintech slide, and Bitcoin is just right a multiple of that. So we're clearly still somewhere in the hype cycle. But this presentation was titled kind of the view into the future, and I think we've got 30 minutes before we hit Q&A, which is a severe challenge for me. I'm doing a 15-hour class at NYU here in Tokyo, and even with 15 hours, we sometimes feel we can't cover everything we'd like to cover. So we're trying to squeeze it in, and I'm sure we have lots of Q&A over food kind of afterwards as well. But before we get into the future, to understand what the future will look like, I think we need to spend a few minutes on how we got here. And there's some reasons why we are in the place we are right now. Obviously, the first one is the internet is everywhere, and the internet and you are inherently connected, which has issues, obviously, with privacy, etc. But computing is everywhere. So you carrying your bank branch basically in your pocket, right? And if you're not using it to text, then you could use it to do securities transaction, transfer your money, buy insurance, or whatever else, which is a fundamentally different model. The other thing is that to actually start up a company today probably doesn't take you more than $5,000. And everybody starts up in the cloud, and so you only pay for the resources that you need, which is still cheap. And if you scale to the level that you actually need to buy your own server, if you ever do, then that's a good thing, because you have a successful business. So what I've done in 2016, for example, Brady Dugan, the former CEO of Credit Suisse, started off building a new investment bank, and they're still 2 years later trying to finalize funding. But the architecture we created for him is basically an entirely cloud-based investment bank. If you think about the companies like Goldman Sachs and Barclays, probably spend $2 to $3 billion a year on technology. Much of that is still based on actually bare metal servers, so their own data centers, etc. Doing this in the cloud gets you about 10 times cheaper. So I would have thought that it can do the same architecture for $200 million a year instead of $2 billion. The Internet of Things might be surprising to see it in a fintech presentation, but I would like to put out the vision simply that lots of the fintech conversations that we have today still talk about payments between individuals or corporations, individuals. And if you look out 5 to 10 years when basically all the things are connected, most of the commerce might actually be between machines. That's a fundamentally different model for financial services as well. artificial intelligence and big data, if you follow the history of artificial intelligence, it's also nothing new. There are two branches, and try to explain it in very basic terms, two branches of artificial intelligence, and they map pretty nicely to how we learn as humans. Right, so there's a branch basically that's based on rules, which is like how adults learn. And if you learn a new language, you look at the grammar, you pick up the vocabulary, you try to understand the rules and then apply it. Which is basically how artificial intelligence evolved until 2010-ish. And if you wanted to have a very unfruitful career in artificial intelligence, and for the last 40 years you would have picked that branch because basically it didn't lead anywhere. The other branch is how toddlers learn. Right? And toddlers learn by observing others, basically absorbing what they hear and see, and then trying it out and applying it. And in order to do this on a machine level, you need lots of data and you need lots of processing power. Right? And we only had this basically since about 2013, 2014-ish. And so we see lots of innovation because essentially the technology flipped from rules-based to learning-based. If we want to talk about blockchain, we'll talk about sharing economies and distributed trust. That's very simple. And then everything will be digitized, and we'll come back to that theme, but it also means that from a manufacturing perspective, for example, you don't build big batches anymore. Right? You can basically do on-demand manufacturing. And that's important from a banking and financial services perspective, because if you do only on-demand, then you don't need much working capital. And much of the regional banks, for example, their business would be to finance working capital for small, medium businesses, and that will disappear. So lots of change coming. The World Economic Forum put this out last year at some point, and the essence is that what we see is rapid business model change and the evolution of ecosystems. And both of these things are not very much a strength of the incumbents in the financial services industry. So that's all great. What does this mean? So I'd like to put out a vision that's in a way very, very simple and consists of three parts. And we'll talk about the current reality compared to that vision, and maybe some of the accelerators that could help us establish this. So one is we'll tokenize everything. And if you recognize these pictures, then you have read the CryptoKitty stories from the end of 2017, where people created digital assets on the Ethereum blockchain, and basically they were so popular that they essentially brought the Ethereum blockchain to a halt. And so this was a tokenization of something that actually didn't exist. Right? This was a virtual asset, cute little digital cats that people paid $10,000 and more for, believe it or not, and generated lots of transactions. So it was very popular, but you can tokenize everything. And so fundamental question is, as humans, we're sometimes not very good at learning. Every generation makes the same mistakes again and needs to go through the same learning process. So when we talk about tokenization today, as if it's like something fundamentally new. When would you say, just as a guess, the first tokenization happened? I would postulate 1927. What happened in 1927 was that American depository receipts were created. ADRs are essentially a reflection of a foreign stock that can be traded on US exchanges. And it doesn't have to be one relationship. So you can have, for example, one Finnish stock, so Nokia was always a very popular example, that is matched against 12 ADRs that are traded on the New York Stock Exchange, for example. And that relationship is kept. So you need an element of trust in that, because somebody needs to keep the underlying Nokia shares. Right? But ultimately, we're talking about the tokenization. You've got the ADRs representing a 1/12 share of a Nokia stock that might be traded in Helsinki. And it's no different than anything else you can do with tokenization today. We'll just talk about this if it's not something fundamentally new. So if you think about an evolution of tokenization and different tokenizations models, it's actually something that R3 put out only last week, and it was a very fascinating kind of classification. So on the left-hand side is basically the tokens, the ADR type that we talked about. And the fundamental characteristic of that is that the ADR that you're trading, the underlying asset doesn't move. Right? So it still stays at the custodian, while you can trade as many ADRs back and forth. It doesn't change where the physical asset actually resides. So that's kind of the left-hand side. The next step in that evolution would be we actually have a token that represents the underlying assets directly. And so when you trade that token, then the underlying asset moves. We call this the security today. Right? So if you trade IBM shares, Toyota shares, it's essentially nothing else. So they suggest here that these two categories are financial asset tokens, and some people would say they are security tokens as classifications today. What they call consumer tokens here, other people might talk about as utility tokens. So the value of the token is simply that you get access to a platform. So you can imagine that if Amazon said, well, don't take any US dollars anymore, you need to buy an Amazon coin to actually transact on our platform, that would be such a token. And the last category here is ultimately digital money, and kind of Bitcoin it would fall into this category. So it's a very interesting classification that helps me at least, to understand when I see a proposal, if I see a white paper, which category can I put it? Second component of vision is that once you tokenized everything, actually the end user, you as the person holding that asset, are responsible for its custody. And that means there's no custodian if you have securities, there's no bank that has like your cash in the representation. You actually keep it yourself. And this is Western view, you have the money under the mattress. The Japanese words for that would be like you have the money in your tansu. So I should maybe have used a different picture. And I'll show you some stats that actually, Japan is still, as we all know, such a cash-driven society. Actually, all this crypto stuff is a great opportunity to leapfrog into the 21st century. So when we talk about cash, this is slightly difficult to understand graph maybe. But let's focus on kind of the horizontal axis. The horizontal axis shows you the percentage of non-cash transaction in the economy. And so the prime example of cashless societies today are the Nordic countries, Nordic European countries, sorry. So Finland, Norway, Denmark, Sweden are almost cashless at this point. And China is aggressively moving towards that. China is just such a big place that if you're at the coastal cities or the big cities, you actually can't do anything with cash anymore. You need to have Alipay, WeChat Pay, and everything is digital. But the hinterland kind of is still kind of some behind. And so if you look at France, Germany, Japan. There's still lots of work to do. Right? The Germans like their cash almost as much as the Japanese do. More like at 20% in Japan. It's 80% of the transaction are still cash-based. Funny enough, it's only this week that there was a cashless promotion society created in Japan, which essentially is meant to straddle academia, the government, and the private sector to promote cashless payments. And the goal is, by 2025, to get this to 40%, and ultimately on the way to 80%. Now, my question around this is, with all due respect to Japan, but it's another talking shop, and while Japanese talk about how they get there, the Chinese are actually implementing this. Right? And so the risk is Alipay, WeChat Pay will also come to Japan in the second half of this year, not only for Chinese visitors, but with native Japanese accounts. And so they might just overtake anything that the Japanese industry comes up with very, very quickly. I want you to, so this is classic puzzle, so what's the next number? Think about it. No, it's actually not. This is the number of bank branches per 100,000 people in different countries. So, where do you think is Japan on this scale? On the left. Very much on the left. But surprisingly, actually, the left is Japan. US is only slightly better. The average in industrialized countries is 28. And then the Nordic countries, where we said they're already very, very cashless, is like half the number of branches. So the path for development in Japan is very well defined, right? So we're going basically half. And it could happen in, well, if we get our act together and actually deliver on the 2025 vision and beyond, it could happen within 10 years you see half the number of branches in Japan. The only challenge in Japan is you can't fire the people, right? So I think the technology is there, in a way the will to innovate is there, but you can't let the people go, so you kind of need to work through attrition and retirement for this to happen. This is similar view, this is a view on the ATMs. And the red line that goes down there on the right side is again the Nordic countries. So in the same way that you get less bank branches, you also get less ATM machines. And really, what this is like from 2015 to 17, it's a very short time period that you see it's kind of running off the cliff. Third point, if you tokenize everything and you're your own custodian for your assets, then the type of transfer that you do is between you and me, you and your friends. There isn't really an intermediary anymore. So it's peer-to-peer, and it's hugely attractive. I know how you use your bank. I used, for the last 20 years, my bank for two types of transaction. A, I need a bank account, because my salary gets paid into it, and I need to access my salary somehow. And I did have a mortgage once. That's two things. And I probably enter a bank branch once every 2 years or so. I think we have basically the technical infrastructure in place today. If I found an employee who pays me in crypto, I take crypto, and there's not a bank involved at all. So it's a question of the will and the regulatory framework to implement this, but the technology is actually there. So reality was a very simple vision. The reality is, if you look at crypto exchanges today, they're hyper-centralized. You couldn't think of a more centralized business model than crypto exchanges. Right? And the reason for that is, if you compare this to securities transactions, right? You as the investor or the trader would have a relationship with the broker, channels your transactions, orders to an exchange, and then you have a custodian takes care of your assets. And that's actually a fairly decentralized model. In the crypto world, these three components fall together, and that's a crypto exchange. Right? So it's a centralized, very centralized model of these three functions. And there's not a single crypto exchange on this planet who actually wants to have custody of your assets. Right? Because they get hacked, as we know. And they need to do lots of operational processes to defend against this. So you can't keep all the assets online, you need to take them offline, which is what we described, to get from a hot wallet to cold wallet. So the well-run exchanges basically keep about 90%, 95% of the assets that they're holding offline, because if you keep them offline, nobody can hack that. But that comes with a cost. So all the exchanges would actually like to have a custodial model where the exchange matches orders and executions, generates trades, but the custody happens somewhere else. And you've seen over the last 2 months maybe kind of the initial propositions coming out. So Nomura is doing something here, Coinbase is doing something in the US that takes us much more to an institutional model. And there isn't much institutional investment in crypto yet. So if you think about all that money that could still get into this market, I said I'm not giving investment advice, so I stop here. So this is the reality as well. And I couldn't make the dot on the right any smaller. PowerPoint wouldn't allow me to. So the last point is actually not to scale. But if you take the world population, about half the world population is on the internet today. A third of the world population is on smartphones. And a small fraction is actually on cryptocurrency wallets. That's like there's so much hype around this. But raise your hand here in the room if you hold any cryptocurrency. It's a little more than 0.27%, but right, you get the picture. So there's still not many people, and it's not very convenient. The other thing that you see is blockchain is super interesting. Right? There's lots of happening. We have many different models. We're like on at least the 3rd generation of blockchain. So I would describe Bitcoin 1st generation. Ethereum 2nd generation introduced smart contracts, so it can actually do really interesting business models on that. And it's 3rd generation, everything that has more scales, like an EOS, an IOTA, and so on, these things. And then people working on generation 4, etc. But if you take an old business model, you take an old industry value chain, and you put blockchain underneath, you can drive efficiency. And driving efficiency is very important to incumbents. If you can take out 5 to 10% of the cost of a large bank, there's big money to them. But using blockchain in that way is actually not very innovative. Right? What I'm personally much more interested in is creating business models on blockchain technology that eliminate the incumbent. That's disruptive and innovative, right? And we haven't really seen much of that yet. And so what we've seen is kind of the faster horse. You put a horse onto wheels, an old bank with some blockchain makes it more efficient, makes it faster, but it's not, you haven't developed the automobile yet. And we need to see that over the coming years. The biggest barrier to adoption of cryptocurrencies is what are you actually going to do if something goes wrong? And the comparison for that is always, you have a debit card, you have a bank account, you have a PIN code for your debit card, and so if you lose your PIN code, what do? You go to your bank branch, you call, you get a new PIN code. If you hold cryptocurrency assets, the equivalent to your PIN code is your private key. If you lose your private key, you lose your assets. That's not very convenient, right? my grandma wouldn't like that very much. And so my grandma's not going to do crypto yet. But again, we're getting to like third and fourth generation, and if you look at what EOS is doing, which just launched their mainnet a month ago, there are actually processes and structures and governance built into that technology that allows you to recover your keys. So we're getting to a model that's actually much more convenient and acceptable to a retail investor. And then the whole population kind of goes into two different camps. There's a camp that runs away from regulation as far as it can, right? So Binance, as historically a Chinese crypto exchange, went from China to Japan after China shut down crypto at the end of last year. The Japanese got more difficult, and now they're in Malta, I think, and they were going like somewhere in the Caribbean islands as well. So they clearly have no interest of being regulated. On the other side, you've got the Japanese market, the ugly 4-minute marker. You've got the Japanese side, you've got 16 regulated crypto exchanges, and kind of the leader in the field, like Coin, running 2 exchanges, CoinX here in Japan, in a regulated fashion onshore, and Cryptos in Singapore as an kind of unregulated exchange. But Micah and Mori, as the CEO there, is fully embracing regulation and says we want to stand above the law. And I'm kind of with Mike on this. I think regulation is unavoidable and actually is helpful for the longer term acceptance of the industry. But clearly there's another camp, and at this point we all have opinions, and we'll see who will be right in the end. But what you need to run this whole thing effectively, you need a digital ID. And you need to, as an individual, be in charge of your digital ID. So this is not a Facebook model where you give all your data and they do with that whatever they want. We need to take control back of our data and basically be able to permission other individuals or entities for their data, and maybe sometimes only for a limited amount of time. The good news is there's tons of people, smart people, and lots of capital going into the space. So I think we'll see we're already seeing some good proposals, but we'll see even more over the next 2 years. So we've got a great vision. The reality is there's still some struggles, but it's a very young industry, but we have a bright future ahead. I could break there now, but I think I'll use 2 more minutes to quickly talk about, when we talk about FinTech, we talk lots about startups that are doing interesting things. But startups kind of over the last 2 years have focused on a very narrow business or a business line. And it's very easy to be very good at something that's very narrow. Right? But all the banks have a very broad range of offerings, and so it's much harder to be excellent in all of those. When we talk about FinTech, it's actually interesting to take a look at what the incumbents are doing. And so if you look at kind of the leadership of Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, they don't want to be a bank. We're a technology company. And kind of in an Asian context, Ping An is one of the largest insurers in China, and they actually valued as an insurance company. But if you're traded and valued as an insurance company, you might have a price-earnings ratio of around 12. If you're a technology company, that might be more like 30 or 40. So if you're a multi-billion-dollar market cap company, we're talking real money, right? 3 times the valuation. And so Ping An is trying very hard to convince the market with all the investments that they're making that they're actually a technology company as well. And so there are a few very interesting developments. So Goldman started Marcus in 2016, which is basically a retail unsecured lending marketplace that allows you to consolidate credit card debt. They were the fastest growing fintech business in that space in the history, beating any other, and some of them are listed like Landing Tree, any other fintech startup, and built as a brickless, purely virtual business model, which by the virtue of being just an internet proposition, you actually can now take and lift up into other countries, which they're doing. So the UK is next. Right? Japan might not be too far behind. It's just a matter of getting the license. The technology is there, and so you generate scale by lifting it up. Capital One was the first financial institution to use Alexa voice recognition technology. They started in 2016, and for almost a year, until early 2017, they were the only financial institution on Alexa. That's purely unbelievable to have, like a 1 year competitive advantage. But basically you can do anything in voice that you can do in an app or on the internet. Now let's think about what that means in terms of the user experience or the user experience design. Right? You don't need somebody who designs screens anymore, you need somebody who designs an experience, because there isn't a screen. Fundamental change in the industry. Last example, and my favorite, Amazon has been lending to small and medium businesses since 2011. They've been doing this only in 3 markets, the US, the UK, and Japan. So they're actually here with that business. And if you trade your goods on the Amazon marketplace, they might offer you a loan because they have all the data on your business. And if they feel that the only thing that you need based on the data that they have about you is more working capital, they offer you a loan. Because if you can turn over more goods, they generate more premiums, it's good for them, the same way it's good for you. But this is a business that banks should be doing, right? But banks don't care about small and medium businesses. So the incumbents are not sleeping, and as much as we're talking about fintech kind of in the startup space, there's actually lots happening in the incumbents. Ooh. Wow, so Q&A.